Good evening. There's no way to truly convince a person who has chosen to disbelieve at all costs. Here's the thing, we think that there's some sort of magic argument that you can make that would stun your counterpart, your rival, into conceding the argument. But some people are basically taught to be stubborn, to be to believe one thing and believe nothing else. And that is the thing. Belief is a choice. Belief is a choice. And if somebody is committed enough to making the choice, there is nobody who can force them to think otherwise. But here's the thing. Once you start down that path, there it doesn't there isn't necessarily any place that ultimately one can go where one can say, we're it's like if you really wanted to insist on denying something until somebody directly presents you with the information, with the truth. If you really think about it, how many things do you accept? How many things do you accept basically on faith? Like this is part of what makes paranoia such a feature of schizophrenia. What makes it such a potent kind of madness. And that is that ultimately at some point just about everything know, just about everything is you trusting somebody else. I mean, I have personally never seen France with my own two eyes, Paris within France, the Notre Dame Cathedral, either, before or after the fire. I've never seen Hamburg, Germany, or Copenhagen, Denmark, or London, England, or any part of Europe. I have seen Washington, D.C. I have seen parts of many sort of states personally. I have memories of that. I've seen parts of New Mexico, but I've never been to Hawaii. I've never been to Washington State, to Oregon, California, Nevada. Utah. The list can go on. So if I'm going to distrust anything but what I've personally seen, let's see, how many states would that be? Um, I Texas, of course. Although I can't be certain that Odessa or hmm, I can be pretty sure that Oklahoma exists. I'm not sure if Kansas exists. I'm not sure if North and South Dakota exist. I'm not sure Minnesota and Michigan and Wisconsin and you get the idea. There are huge portions of the map which I cannot personally vouch for. So does that mean they do not exist? Hmm. Does that mean that they are a conspiracy against me? I have never personally seen the Arctic Ocean, nor have I seen the Pacific. I have not seen the Southern Ocean, nor have I ever traveled to South America or Africa or Australia or any country in Asia. So I shall declare that all of them no longer exist, that the submission to me that they exist is merely a conspiracy of people who are dead set on convincing us the rest of these things exist, and therefore, that we should give them money and this and that and whatever. Now there are these people who speak these languages, and I'm just going to make believe that all these languages are made up. Somebody just did like whatever they did with Klingon and just made it up. But you can go further with that. You can go like, oh, it's not even, all these shows that show all these things, they're just CGI now. And all this evidence that this politician that I like, that politician did bad things. All right, all that information, all those news stories, those don't exist, or were fake news. And we could go on in this vein, on and on and on. When it comes down to it, it's if you presuppose that there's somebody out there who's looking to deceive you, and all they're going to do is just come up with all these weird things that you have to believe, and that they're really, behind all that stuff is, more stuff still. You can disbelieve all kinds of things, even though others in their lived experience go through these things and learn these things and visit these places. You can just say none of that exists because I haven't seen it personally. Or we can even suppose maybe I was drugged. And all those times I thought I saw Arkansas were just flights of fantasy. Mm, mm. Oh, if you get paranoid enough, of course, you can believe that people are watching you that aren't. You can believe that folks mean you evil, that this or that hides great, inhumanity. That's not all. That's the thing. If somebody can convince you to obliviate yourself of this information or that information, if they can convince you to distrust it, well, then they can also fill in new information to replace it. That's the thing. Which is why so often the strategy of those selling conspiracy theories is to ridicule those conspiracies, those the real information, ridicule that, discount that with some ad hominem, like, oh, that's all just big pharma, or oh, that's all just, the, you know, agriculture or whatever. It's not to say that there aren't big multinationals that do collude with one another or things like that. But if your basic response to any unfavorable information is simply to kind of say, "Oh, that's got to be fake news," you can talk and scream about bias yourself, but you're displaying one. But here's the thing, that they need folks to basically disbelieve things, because the more they can clear your mind of any rival beliefs or facts or whatever, the more they can fill it in with their own. And do you think these folks who are lying to you about this or that, do you think they actually give a damn about what's good for you? No, they're out for themselves. This is the thing. People need us stupid. They don't want an argument. They don't want to have to convince us anymore. They don't want to have to struggle with trying to explain us. They don't want to. Well, if I could sum it all up, put it into a nice little neat box, they just don't want to deal with us as equals. The current fad is the whole dark enlightenment. Dark enlightenment. I'll tell you what that is. That's idiots trying to revive the whole Sun King attitude. The notion that you are somehow this transcendent being while everybody else is just some little pipsqueak in this cosmic scheme of things. But you want to know what the truth is? The truth is, every one of those people is one of the peeing, pooping, mortal, able to get sick, able to die people that the rest of us are. And this was obviously true back in the day of the framers of the Patriots, Thomas Jefferson, and all those. They understood that, if you really just look at the history of monarchy, of empire, of nobility, and whatever, you just look through it, you're going to find that these people basically act just like the rest of us. Only unlike most of us, they have really the power to do a lot of damage to other people. And that's the thing. That's the main difference. The ability to do harm to other people. So, really, this dark environment thing, you know, this creation of a crappier and crappier life for the rest of us. This this pushing of an ideal that it basically says that the people who got rich were somehow superior in some form, and because they're superior in some form, they should be able to do whatever they want. But why? Wha- Why? It's not necessarily that these people are stronger or smarter or anything like that. Maybe more ambitious, maybe sometimes more sociopathic. Some people are lucky and some people aren't. The main trick that they're playing on us, these dark alignment figures, the main trick that they're playing on us is getting us to think that by freeing and liberating them, that we're freeing and liberating ourselves. What we don't realize is that the power we hand back to these people, power that had been clawed back by our forebears, our folks, you know, 80, 90 years ago. The thing that we're doing is basically we're catering to somebody else's interests while undermining our own and thinking that, oh, if we do right by this person, they'll have to do right by us. And the truth of the matter is that things do not work that way. Yeah, if you have somebody who if you have somebody who, I mean, it's this thing of, I hear this argument, I hear this thing from people, um, that Trump is supposedly less vulnerable to corruption because he's got so much money, he doesn't need more. And when I heard that argument made, it was like, okay, I remember Time Cop, and I remember the villain played by Ron Silver, who ironically went MAGA later on, or Might have. I don't know whether he lived long enough for that, but he certainly went Tea Party, I think. Um, his character went, I'm going to make so much money that I'll be able to fund my campaign myself and I will be above all this corruption. This is basically his villain speech, which follows the character basically having exploited time travel technology to enrich himself, exploited it to change history, um, and so on and so forth. Basically, marking him out as a pretty corrupt guy, despite the fact he supposedly got so much money that he would never need, campaign finance again. And that's the thing. This is sort of the thing that we're kind of forgetting, and that is that yeah, it's a matter of greed. If you're a rich person who wants more money earlier when you're maybe poor or something like that, well, you're not going to necessarily stop wanting money once you got a taste for it later on. But we've sort of been obliviated of that because all the rhetoric is termed in terms of our being able to do things, our being able to set up businesses a certain way, and so on and so forth. When we don't actually typically do that, most of us just live ordinary lives. Most of us are, the employees, not the employers. So all this empathy that we develop for these people, unfortunately, gets turned back on ourselves. Or in a bad way. We get all the help and the good we did for these people. They don't. They don't reflect that back on us. And so we see our jobs cut again. We see chainsaw owls going through the industrial landscape. And now bunches and bunches of people my age or younger, males, after all you know, these men's rights sort of Jordan Peterson sort of Andrew Tate sort of misogyny misogyny selling Return of the King selling stuff after they pumped a generation of boys who became men with this garbage, guess what happens? It are we better? Maybe a lot of rights that women had have gone trampled. But what's what have men gone for it? What men have gone for it is what's called the loneliness epidemic. You know what it really is? What it really is that we have been sold on being abusive. We've been sold on being angry and anti-intellectual, so on and so forth. We've been sold on some of the most negative attributes of men, of the masculine character. We've been sold on cutting off the parts of us that appreciate beauty, that appreciate into smart things, that appreciate you know not domination but cooperation. We've become these stunted creatures who are, I mean, I hear about what some kids, the laundry list of things that kids these days are told by right wingers and online types that they're told would make them gay. The list of these things, it's like talking to women, according to some idiots out there, makes you gay. The very act of relating to the opposite sex, because has a because it involves dealing with femininity, because it involves dealing with a softer side of yourself, that makes it gay. I'll tell you what gay is. Gay is you feel attracted to men. And unless you feel attracted to men, you aren't gay. If you're straight, you're straight. If you're cisgender, you're cisgender. If you're transgender, you're transgender. If you're gay, you're gay. If you're bisexual, you're bisexual. So on and so forth. A lot of these things, I can't say that it's all completely predetermined, but I think a lot of, you know, attraction is wired in. But they want to portray it as a choice. And so, portraying it as a choice, they do this pernicious sort of thing where they basically attribute homosexuality to anything that isn't some sort of, you know, you know, ultra macho alpha male sort of garbage. We're confronted every day with this sort of way of argument where people kind of get this belief that if they can argue themselves into a conclusion, that that conclusion must therefore be true and valid, when the reality is, it's important always to try and map things to reality. Because not every opinion is equally personal. Not everything that you can believe for yourself is something that, not everything is it's such that if you believe one way or another, it doesn't matter. You know, COVID vaccination in general. You can pretend that like your opinion matters on that, but the reality is nature dictates how things work. And if you want to know who's right and who's wrong, you look at the data. But you know something? Most of us aren't scientists. Most of us are not competent to do that level of science. I mean, sorry. Most of us don't have the time or the patience or the grades to learn the calculus and the statistics and the background on all these sciences necessary to be the kind of people who can, and this is the important part, generate new knowledge. And a lot of people just they have this sort of Thomas Kuhn, that's Kuhn, loop in their head where they've been taught to think of themselves as they've been taught to think of themselves as revolutionary science people. And so they will confront the rest of us with evidence that what we believed scientifically is actually completely wrong. And basically they'll basically push their idea and say that their idea must be correct because they've reasoned it through and done their research. Yeah. Unlike those jokers in the labs who actually do randomized controls and that sort of silly stuff. And it tells you something that they disrespect the COVID vaccine after three clinical trials and believe that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, believe that those are miracle cures before anybody actually completes a study on those drugs' effectiveness. And so, on one hand, it's you have to give us proof, and on the other hand, we don't need proof. This is part of the problem with the sort of the unreasoned approach that many people take to science is that they don't see that there is a sort of a requisite symmetry that ideas from this point of view have to square with ideas from that point of view. They just see their own point of view and don't they think it's below them to actually go through and check their results, check whether their ideas work out right. They want everything to work according to their perspective. But some things, if you see it off that axis, fall apart. They fall apart. It's and it's especially like the measles vaccinations out there. You got these anti-vaxxers and they're telling people, "Oh, the measles vax, the MMR vax, they're all evil and they're doing bad things to people." And so we go from a state where very few people are actually getting cases of measles. Very few people are getting hospitalized. Nobody's dying. We just recently had the first death in 23 years. And what's their idea? Let's go and undermine MMR vaccination. Tell people that it's evil, that it's poison. And lo and behold, people believe that. And when those people believe that, they go out, they don't vaccinate their kids. They don't, you know, and lo and behold, as they do that, it builds up a supply of people who are susceptible to the virus. And lo and behold, when that happens, then the virus comes that, up to that, it's, oh, yay, free lunch, free people to munch on. And so the virus spreads, and measles is one of those very good viruses at spreading. And that's what we see. We see people go into complete denial about anything and everything that contradicts their point of view, that makes them look bad. This notion that you can somehow control the information sphere, that you can, that you can, eh, on and on, this sort of a perpetual need to try and twist and turn all the all the notions that people have in politics, you know, with the idea that ultimately you'll be able to do whatever you want. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite work out that way. Mm, pardon me. We see time after time the consequences that other people predicted come into pass, where they were saying the fundamentals of the economy are sound. Crash happens just months later, if not right on top of that. It's the problem with the dark enlightenment is that it's pretty much doing its absolute best to discredit itself while it's trying to rise. It's like, okay, we're going to, we're going to hire the stupidest possible man to become president, and that man is going to do all our dirty work for us. And it's like, they decided to try out fascism, authoritarianism, one all powerful guy, and that they choose somebody who had intelligence, who had grace, who had a sort of, I don't know, regal manner. Did they choose that? No. They chose the stupidest possible person. And why? Seemingly just to tick us off. And this is another one of these great sort of things about how politics goes. These people, they go out their way to trigger folks, go out of their way to traumatize folks. That's what trigger means. They go out of their way to make sure that people are just miserable, purposefully, purposefully causing misery, purposefully punishing people, on and on and on. And so it's like, at a certain point, they're not convincing anybody anymore. At a certain point, they're just, they're trying to twist and turn things in public relations or whatever. But they're not figuring what's going on behind the face of the audience, what they're thinking, what they're believing, so on and so forth. So, but also, as they're doing, all their traumatizing, all their, beating up on people, all their abuses against people, all of their sort of smug prick sort of attitude. You know, the kind of attitude you see a lot of in certain MAGA people, where it's just like, are you triggered? Are you angry? Are you, where they're just acting like emotional vampires. And it's just ultimately, if I, let's see, it's getting kind of late. But I think my point ultimately is they want people to be arguing things like it's going out of style. They want to be relitigating everything, retrying everything, and it doesn't occur to them that that's right. Back to the election. That's the thing that's always struck me about that election, or about their rhetoric about that election. And hopefully, I can maintain this in memory while I'm trying to, allow my mind to go to sleep. But it's like they want to be able to be as sadistic and destructive and disruptive and set, you know, glimmer and gold around them. They want to grab from others, take from others. They want to be able to take your life, your liberty, and everything without having to go through a whole bunch of due process. All of that. They want to believe that after all that folks did, that after all Trump screwed up, that after a historic drop in the economy like we hadn't seen since the days of FDR, they want to believe that somehow the only reason why Trump lost that election is that a whole bunch of activists or there was a big voter fraud thing. It never occurs to them quite simply they ticked enough people off and galvanized those people so that they came together to oppose him. They basically created their own opposition and they hypercharged it, and they're still hypercharging it. The smugness is off the charts with these people, and it's creating new recruits for our side. I mean, you beat up on people, you attack them, you insult them, not just in a sort of sparring sort of sense, but insult as in you're trying to destroy the basis of their soul, take their hearts. and yet they're surprised that people banded together to defeat him. They just don't get the idea that if you do a lot of bad stuff to people, people's sympathies will flow away from you. But they're more than willing to impose power on everybody else. That's the thing. They want us to believe that they were cheated out of it when the truth was they never had it to begin with. If there's a point to being cooperative. There's a point to being friendly with people. There's a point with treating other people like equals, especially in a democratic republic. Uh, I think people need to remember what into things, what went into one solar system or another. Sorry if I'm a bit narcoleptic at the moment. you know, I spent much of 2016 to 2024 on going through a lot of Twitter. And I'll always call it Twitter because that's what it is to me. But I went it, I went into it so often, and folks basically said, "Oh, he campaigned from his basement, so it's impossible that." No, Trump is his own worst enemy in politics. As long as he's basically, I mean, it's basically you traumatize people, you mistreat people, you beat up, shoot, gas people, or earlier in the first term, Trump is, doing all sorts of things you know, to sabotage our ability to deal with viruses and everything. You see equipment shortages, da 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 da. Yeah, I'm gonna stop making videos, but again, they want to traumatize other people, be sadistic as possible to other people, and they don't understand people are making these sort of things and saying it at straight they don't understand that it is completely possible to turn a nation of people against you if you screw things up bad enough, if you prove to be a mean enough, nasty enough person. Eventually people will want you gone. But no, we're not allowed that. All right, so I'm going to I'm gonna sign off before I nod off. Y'all have a good night.